Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading from some history magazines. But since Halloween is fast approaching, we're not going to read just any stories. Oh, no. We're going to read some spooky stories from history. Let me show you what we'll read. I think first we'll start in this magazine. We are going to be reading about the Fox sisters and the Beast of Gévaudan. And then in this magazine, we are going to read about the Jersey Devil and Peter Stump, the werewolf. So let's just dive right in to the spooks. I'm going to try to fold it. There we go. Spiritualism, communing with the dead. The desire to communicate with the dead is probably as old as human history. Ghosts played major roles in ancient cosmologies, from Mesopotamia to Greece to China. But seeking out the counsel of the departed was outlawed in Judeo-Christian traditions. In several places in the Old Testament, consulting mediums or necromancers is expressly forbidden. For millennia, accusations of communing with spirits could result in punishment and death. But that all changed in the 19th century when spiritualism exploded across the United States and Europe. The massive social and technological changes of the Industrial Revolution, the ravages of war, and the latest scientific advancements all challenged traditional beliefs when it came to communication with the dead. Supernatural start. The origins of modern spiritualism in the United States can be traced to Hydesville, New York. It was there in 1848 in a house on a lonely crossroads that Maggie Fox, age 14, and Kate, her 11-year-old sister, held seances that supposedly communicated with the spirit of a peddler murdered in the house 5 years before. If you are an injured spirit manifested by 3 raps, would come the prompt from one sister, performing before one of their transfixed neighbors. 3 raps duly followed. After local demonstrations of their supposed powers, the Fox sisters went on a national tour whose popularity helped the spread of spiritualism across the U.S. and beyond. This new form of communication with the dead captivated the public because it seemed to marry science with religion. 4 years before, the Fox sisters began pulling messages out of the air. Telegraphs had begun sending messages along electrical wires via Morse code. The tapping messages sent from the dead during seances were portrayed by experts as the spiritual equivalent of electronic telegraphy. Spiritualism attempted to align itself with the principles of electrical science so as to distinguish mediumship from more superstitious forms of mystical belief in previous centuries, wrote Jeffrey Sconce in his 2000 book, Haunted Media, Electronic Presence from Telegraphy to Television. This scientific religion quickly gained followers. It soon spread to Britain and from there to the European continent. Believers ranged from rural dwellers to middle classes, to urban middle classes, to intellectual scientists and aristocrats. By the 1860s, spiritualism was particularly popular in England and France. The Frenchman Allan Kardec developed a variation of spiritualism called Spiritism, which was distinguished by a belief in reincarnation. His Spirits book, published in 1857, was read widely, not only in France, but by the 1870s and 1880s throughout South America and Russia. In America, spiritualism experienced a boom with the Civil War, as many of the bereaved turned to seances to contact fallen soldiers. According to one estimate, the war added 2 million new believers to the spiritualist movement. By the 1880s, the movement had 8 million adherents in the United States and Europe. In the first decade of the early 20th century, popular interest in spiritualism waned, but was revitalized by the twin devastations of World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic. Mediums' messages. With no churches or formal organization, spiritualism was practiced mostly in private, domestic settings. Many mediums created similar conditions for their seances, with participants sitting around a table in a dimly lit room. Attendees would often hold hands and then wait for signs of paranormal activity. These might be tapping sounds, a breeze on the back of the neck, ringing bells, or moving furniture. Mediums would try to establish contact with the spirit and ask if it was willing to appear. The spirits would manifest their messages in a variety of ways, according to accounts. Some employed a series of knocks to spell out words, following special codes written on paper. Another method was psychography, or automatic writing. The medium's hand would unconsciously write what the spirit wanted to communicate. In pneumatography, or direct writing, the spirit wrote messages without any intermediary. Some spirits allegedly communicated through the mouth of a spiritualist. The most famous of these so-called trance mediums was the Bostonian Leonora Piper. Piper channeled the famous, including Johann Sebastian Bach, and the obscure, especially a mysterious Frenchman named Dr. Fenouil. Her voices elicited much scientific interest, led by American psychologist William James. In the end, James could not reach a firm conclusion about Piper, allowing for the possibility she could tap into a cosmic consciousness that might include spirits. Interest in the spirit world even crossed over into the burgeoning world of photography. Some photographers claimed to be able to capture images of spirits while photographing the living. American photographer William Mumler is said to be the first person to capture a spirit in a photograph in the early 1860s. In one of his most famous photos, the ghost of Abraham Lincoln appears behind his wife Mary, with his hands resting on her shoulders. Today it is believed he used a double exposure technique to superimpose the ghost onto images of his clients. In 1869, Mumler was charged with fraud, but acquitted. The accusations ended his career, but spirit photography continued to be popular for decades. Overturning the table. When spiritualism first emerged in the late 1840s, it attracted its fair share of skepticism. In the 1850s, British scientist Michael Faraday debunked table turning, an activity in which spirits supposedly moved, tilted, or wrapped a table around which participants were seated. Faraday would covertly insulate the table so it could not be affected by so-called electrical or magnetic forces from the spirit world. He then demonstrated that movement was being generated where participants placed their hands, which strongly suggests that people were unconsciously affecting the table themselves, a phenomenon known as the ideomotor response. Skeptics also demonstrated mediums' manipulations. Dim light creates sensitivity to sound, and people under such circumstances become highly suggestible, especially when experiencing grief. The accumulation of such exposés partly prompted Maggie Fox to admit that her and her sister's seances were a fraud. In 1888, Fox admitted that the rapping sounds were just the sisters cracking their knuckles and other joints. Perhaps the most sensational denunciation of spiritualism was put forward by American escape artist and illusionist Harry Houdini. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and an avid spiritualist, became friends with Houdini in 1920, and Lady Doyle, a practicing medium, claimed to be producing written messages from Houdini's late mother. To Houdini, the letters sounded nothing like his beloved mother, and he publicly denounced spiritualism, which cost him Doyle's friendship. Houdini became a dedicated debunker of psychics and mediums. His background as a magician gave him keen insight into the tricks of the trade, which he chronicled in his 1924 book, A Magician Among the Spirits. After Houdini's death in October 31st, 1926, his wife Bess practiced yearly Halloween seances to reach him. To weed out frauds, she and her husband created a secret code before his death to use if his spirit was able to reach out from the great beyond. Her seances continued for 10 years, but he never contacted her. Spiritualism's popularity has greatly waned since the 1920s, but believers still linger, including those who still hold annual Halloween seances in the hopes of contacting Houdini. Next we have Terror in the Countryside, the Beast of Gévaudan. Jeanne Boulet, a 14-year-old shepherd girl, was tending livestock in the wooded valleys near the Allier River in the Gévaudan region of central southern France one day in June 1764. Her badly injured body was later discovered, the victim of an apparent wolf attack. Her death did not seem unusual at the time. Children often shepherded sheep or cattle by themselves, and wolves were a part of the hazards of rural life. More fatalities like Boulet's followed, with severe injuries, dismemberments, and even decapitations. Whatever this deadly creature was, it was far more ferocious than a regular wolf. As whispers of a werewolf began to circulate, the deadly creature became known as La Bête, the Beast. It would terrorize Gévaudan for 3 years, killing as many as 100 people. Between 1764 and 1767, more than 100 wolves were killed in Gévaudan, but scholars are still trying to determine if any of them was the deadly beast. Savage attacks. The historic Gévaudan County, situated in the rugged highlands of the Massif Central, straddles France's Auvergne and Languedoc regions. It is a dramatic, forbidding land of dense forests and rain-drenched plateaus. Gévaudan had once been prosperous, but the wars of the 16th century had battered the rural economy. Many locals were extremely poor and subsisted by herding livestock. After Boulet's death and the following half-dozen cases, young shepherds banded together in groups. But the beast was not deterred by their numbers. The savage attacks continued, taking the lives of mostly women and children. By the fall of 1764, word of the terrifying monster had spread far beyond Gévaudan to the rest of France. The beast became a national obsession thanks to the editor of the Courrier d'Avignon, François Morena. The end of the 7 Years' War with Britain in 1763 had caused a news drought for Morena. Successful in peddling sensationalist stories, Morena printed stories of the Beast of Gévaudan to boost the newspaper's sales and spread word of the creature around the nation. These attacks generated dread, which was stoked further by the dramatic reporting of Morenas's correspondence. One such report attributed astonishing swiftness to the beast. Another said that it had the gaze of a devil. Others reported that it possessed the intelligence of a wily, robust, and skilled gladiator. In late 1764, Morenas's publication was comparing the beast to the mythical Nemean lion and other terrifying monsters. Descriptions of the beast often matched characteristics of a canid with other unusual qualities, especially its size. The beast was said to stand as tall as a donkey or bull. Its fur was reddish-brown with a dark stripe running down its spine. With 6 sharp claws on each of its 4 feet and a long feline tail, the beast was also said to ambush its victims, eat their flesh, and drink their blood. In addition to horrific accounts of the beast itself, the newspapers also printed survivors' accounts of their encounters. In January 1765, a group of preteens held the creature at bay with sticks. In another incident in March, Jean Jouve fought to protect her 3 children. One of them, age 6, died from his injuries. One of the most famous was Marie-Jeanne Vallée, the maiden of Gévaudan, who fought the beast off, wounding it in the chest with a bayonet. On the hunt. For some, the challenge to catch the beast represented a good career move and a shot at redemption. A local military captain, Jean-Baptiste Dumel, recruited thousands of local people to help him hunt down the beast. In fall 1764, based on reports of the long black stripe down its back, Dumel speculated that the beast was not a wolf but a big cat. This animal is a monster whose father is a lion. It remains open what the mother is. Despite its best efforts, Dumel failed to capture the monster. By early 1765, the continuing Gévaudan drama had attracted the attention of King Louis XV. He rewarded the group of boys who had fought off the beast with sticks and gave their leader a free education. In March, the king sent his own hunters to trap the beast. A renowned Normandy wolf hunter, Jean-Charles Vomez de Neval, was appointed to head the mission, but he too was unsuccessful. Rattled by his appointee's lack of progress, Louis XV sent his bodyguard, the veteran soldier François Antoine. On September 21st, 1765, Antoine's men killed a large wolf that they believed to be the beast. The body was sent to Paris, and Antoine was rewarded. 2 months later, however, the attacks resumed. Between December 1765 and June 1767, as many as 30 more fatalities were reported. Fear stalked the Gévaudan once again, except this time the locals were on their own. Embarrassed by their failure, the authorities paid little attention, and even the newspapers had lost interest. On June 19, 1767, local hunter Jean Chastel shot and killed a large animal. From then on, the attacks stopped. Look at it. Ooh, spooky. Witnesses described the fallen creature as a wolf, but a strange one. It had a monstrous head and a coat of red, white, and gray that hunters had not seen on wolves before. Mystery monsters. For 3 years, something had been terrorizing the people of the Gévaudan region. As many as 100 lives were lost, although some sources claim the total could be as high as 300. In the following centuries, different explanations have been investigated as to the cause of these horrific deaths. One of the most popular was supernatural in origin, the werewolf. Science has ruled that one out, but the legend lingered for many years, perhaps because of the rumor that Chastel shot the beast of Gévaudan with a silver bullet. Recent theorists have speculated that a serial killer could have been at work in Gévaudan, who employed some sort of animal to help him kill their victims. However, most experts think this idea is too far-fetched. The answers with the most support comes from the animal world. Others suggested the beast could have been an escaped creature that was not native to France, like a hyena. Biologist Karl Hans Tocke had recently argued that the beast was an escaped juvenile male lion, whose immature mane would have looked strange to inhabitants of the French countryside. According to Tocke, the lion eventually died after eating poisoned bait, which had been placed throughout the Gévaudan region. Historian J. M. Smith has proposed a less exotic theory. The beast of Gévaudan was rather likely to be several large wolves. The distorting lens of the press and subsequent national hysteria created the beast of Gévaudan and the hype that went with it. Writing more than a century after the last attack, Robert Louis Stevenson, future author of Treasure Island, was traveling through Gévaudan and described his dismay at how the world was changing. This was the land of the ever-memorial beast, the Napoleon Bonaparte of wolves. Now that the railroad was arriving, you may not meet with an adventure worth the name. The modern world may have crept into Gévaudan, but the true identity of the beast will most likely never be solved to anyone's satisfaction, lending a permanent air of mystery to this wild region of the Massif Central. Very interesting, isn't it? Let's move on to our next stories. Peril in the Pine Barrens, the Jersey Devil. New Jersey is a popular place to live. Sandwiched between New York City and Philadelphia, it is the most densely populated state in the Union, with more than 1,200 people per square mile. Alaska has the lowest, with slightly more than 1 person per square mile. Despite the reputation for suburban sprawl, New Jersey holds a pristine surprise, the Pine Barrens. Also known as the Pine Lands, this enormous tract of land covers some 1.1 million acres, 22% of New Jersey's total area. The Pine Barrens' sandy soil, dense forests, and pristine waterways are largely undeveloped, but they are also home to something sinister, the Jersey Devil. Haunting the Barrens, a beast with giant leathery wings, a horse's head, glowing red eyes, and sharp claws has been scaring residents for nearly 300 years. Devilish origins. According to tradition, the Jersey Devil was born on a dark and stormy night in 1735 to a woman known as Mother Leeds. She and her family lived in Leeds Point, a community on New Jersey's southeastern coast. Pregnant for the 13th time, she was experiencing a slow, painful labor. In agony, she cried out, "Let this one be a devil." A seemingly healthy child was delivered, but after its birth, the infant sprouted a tail and wings. It let out a blood-curdling shriek and then flew up the chimney and into the night. Garden State folklore includes several versions of the devil's origin. In one telling, Mother Leeds is a witch who had sex with the devil. In another, the monster is the product of a cursed union between a Jersey girl and a British soldier during the Revolutionary War. The indigenous people of southern New Jersey, the Lenape, venerated a forest god, Msing, described as a deer-like creature with bat-like wings. It is possible that European settlers in the region learned of this sylvan god and mapped it onto their whispers of the so-called Leeds Devil. The Devil and Daniel Leeds. These stories have provided historians with the compelling mystery to solve, the true origins of the Jersey Devil. Two professors from Keene University, Brian Regal and Frank Esposito, have connected the legend to a 17th century English colonist named Daniel Leeds. Born to Quaker parents around 1652 in Leeds, England, Leeds would choose their faith as an adult before he moved to New Jersey around 1677. He and his family settled in Burlington among a vibrant Quaker community. Leeds worked as a surveyor, among other things, and purchased land on New Jersey's southern Atlantic coast in the 1690s. It became the family seat, known as Leeds Point. He also began writing and publishing, starting with an almanac that included the movements of heavenly bodies as well as astrological symbols. The almanac and its later publications earned him the ire of the Quakers, who would eventually dismiss him as evil and Satan's harbinger. Regal and Esposito believe it was Leeds' unholy reputation that started the association of the Leeds name with monstrous and supernatural forces. Trying to find the historical identity of Mother Leeds has been unsuccessful. Leeds married 4 times. His first wife, Mary, with whom he had several children, died before he left England. In New Jersey, Leeds married 3 more times. His third wife, Dorothy Young, could be a likely candidate for the historical Mother Leeds, in that she bore him 8 children before her death in 1699. But no 17th century sources that refer to Dorothy or any of the Leeds wives as Mother Leeds have been found, making them unlikely inspirations for the cursed mother of the legend. True encounters. Daniel Leeds' religious battles planted the seeds for the legend of the Leeds Devil, as it was called. Tales of the monster stayed in the region, circulating as ghost stories or warnings of dangers lurking in the forests. For the 17th and 18th centuries, the Leeds Devil was part of a robust oral tradition. Look at this roller coaster in New Jersey. That's Jersey Devil themed. It was in the early 19th century that the Leeds Devil began to raise its profile. Tradition says that American war hero Stephen Decatur met the Leeds Devil at his foundry in the Pine Barrens. The ex-king of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, claimed to have run into the monster on his estate Point Breeze. Historians have tried in vain to track down the original source material for these accounts in both Decatur's and Bonaparte's papers, with no results. In 1840, attacks on livestock were also attributed to the monster. The first printed mention of the Leeds Devil is an 1859 Atlantic Monthly article covering the Pine Barrens. The author took a dim view of the locals and their legend, but recorded that little children did be eaten and maids abused by the monster. Interest in the Jersey Devil exploded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as first-person accounts of the monster appeared in newspapers. In an 1893 New York Sun article, an Erie railroad engineer claimed the Jersey Devil had attacked his train. The Trenton Times in 1905 reported that the Leeds Devil was born in Bordertown, but this monster looked more like an ape or chimpanzee. Over a week in early January 1909, Philadelphia newspapers would feature prominent coverage of the Jersey Devil and rumors of strange footprints appearing in the Pine Barrens. Some accounts featured detailed accounts of attacks on streetcars and social clubs by a creature described as a red-eyed winged kangaroo. The media accounts spun up the public. Local governments installed curfews, and hunting parties were formed. One Philadelphia huckster claimed to have captured the Jersey Devil and put it on display at the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum in Philadelphia. Crowds thronged to see the beast, which was actually a painted kangaroo with fake wings attached. The hoax was quickly sniffed out, with the New York Times exposing the ruse in late January 1909. The hysteria died down, but the legend did not. Sightings continued throughout the 20th century, but not with the same frequency as 1909. Folklorists continued to mine tales of the Jersey Devil, solidifying the beast in the imagination of the Garden State, so much so that roller coasters and even a National Hockey League team, the Jersey Devils, are named in its honor. The monster has become a badge of pride for New Jersey. Today, visitors to the state can tour places associated with the local legend in the tranquil and sometimes foreboding forests of the Pine Barrens. It says this is a little old village, it says, in the Pine Barrens where the Jersey Devil's been sighted before. Let's read about the werewolf trial of Peter Stump. On October 31st, 1589, a large crowd gathered in the German city of Bedburg, near Cologne, to witness an execution. The condemned man was Peter Stump, a 50-year-old farmer who had confessed to making a pact with the devil. He wasn't seeking riches. He wanted the ability to turn into a werewolf. His shocking crimes included multiple murders and cannibalism. Of the 16 people he killed, 13 were children, his own son among them, whose brain he allegedly devoured. He also admitted to having had sexual relations with his daughter and with a succubus, which is a demon in the guise of a beautiful woman. Of all other that ever lived, none was comparable unto this hellhound, an account of his execution said. Stump, called Stube and Stumpf in some sources, suffered terribly during his execution, one of the most brutal on record. He was strapped to a wheel and skinned alive. His bones were broken. He was decapitated, and then his body burned at the stake. As a warning, his head was impaled on a post in the center of the village. Wolves and witches. The lurid nature of Stump's crimes and punishment captured the public imagination. Although Stump's trial and execution stand out, his was not an isolated case. Between the 15th and 18th centuries in Europe, famine, plague, war, and religious struggle gave rise to superstitious beliefs, which included fears of witches, usually women, and werewolves, typically men. Accusations of lycanthropy were often intertwined with, but far less frequent than, witchcraft. In some areas of Europe, there is no record of werewolf trials at all. In England, Werewolves were almost completely eradicated in the 16th century. There are no records of werewolf trials, nor are there any in the Mediterranean region of Europe. European werewolf panics were centered in areas with wild wolves. Forested regions. I have to put it down here. It's too... Anyway. As well as strong culture of livestock herding, such as Germany and France. Fears of feral wolves preying on animals and children grew into fears of demonic wolves. If rabid wolves were present, werewolves might be blamed for their crimes. The most comprehensive list of werewolf trials in early modern Germany contains about 300 cases. While not inconsiderable, that number pales in comparison with the 30,000 to 45,000 executions for witchcraft in Germany during the same period. Look at this drawing. Oof. Brutal. Accused werewolves were mostly but not exclusively male, and most were shepherds. Wolves were viewed as strong, violent, and aggressive, traits usually associated with men, said Brian Levac, Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Texas at Austin. In most contemporary accounts about Stump, the man transformed himself into a wolf by wearing a wolfskin belt given to him by the devil. By removing the belt, Stump could return to human form. Levac points out that werewolves all used some instrument to effect their transformation, which is typical of male witchcraft. All of them used some sort of instrument in their magic, such as Stump's use of a magical belt, whereas the lower forms of village magic allegedly practiced by female witches consisted mainly of charms, curses, or various concoctions. There's the story of his trial and his horrible execution. Stumped for detail. Despite the curiosity stirred up by the trial, the historical evidence left behind of Stump's ordeal is thin. No interrogation transcripts or court records from the trial have survived. For details about Stump, historians must rely on a collection of pamphlets and handbills. The longest is an English pamphlet published in 1590, which is this one up here. The 16-page text asserts to be a translation of a German work, but historians have not found the original document. What is understood about Stump's life largely comes from these accounts, although there is little agreement among them. Even his exact name varies, some even claiming that he got the name Stumpf, which is German for stump, because he lost his left hand in an accident. Scholars are unsure when Stump was born, but his occupation is consistently given as a farmer. He is said to be from Eprath, a village near Bedburg. Some scholars suggest Stump was a wealthy landowner, based on a description in the 1519 English pamphlet. Let's see if I can't. There we go. He would go through the streets of Cologne, Bedburg, and Eprath in homely habit, and very civilly, as one well known to all the inhabitants there about, and oftentimes was, he saluted of those whose friends and children he had butchered, though nothing suspected for the same. This detail is likely nothing more than dramatic color, however, since no other source exists to confirm it. Motivations. It is from these salacious sources that details of the Stump affair must be drawn, although supernatural elements in the story are given as fact. In one version, Stump is arrested after a local farmer enters into a fight with a wolf and cuts off its left paw with a sword. When the farmer later encounters Peter Stump, the farmer sees that Stump is also missing his left hand, which is enough to arouse suspicion that Stump and the wolf are one and the same entity. In the English pamphlet, Stump's arrest is more dramatic. After a series of murders and livestock deaths, villagers form patrols. Stump is spotted while in his wolf form and chased by them. Stump removes his magic belt and reverts to human form in full view of his pursuers. Once his identity is confirmed by the mob, he is arrested. That's the story I know. Stump's guilt hinges on his subsequent confession, which was secured under torture and threat of future torture. Thus being apprehended, he was shortly after put to the rack, but fearing the torture, he voluntarily confessed his whole life. Some historians believe it's possible that Stump was a murderer. One has even posited that the werewolf legends originated in attempts to explain the presence of serial killers. Even if he was not, it is likely that any local wolf attacks on livestock or people were attributed to him as well. Another historical factor might well have made Stump a scapegoat. His alleged crimes coincided with a period known as the Cologne War, a conflict between Protestant and Catholic factions. Roving mercenaries terrorized the region. Unsolved crimes could have prompted sinister folk stories of a werewolf prowling the forests. Consequently, Stump may have been singled out to ritually purge the community of evil through his execution. Religious disputes also provide another possible interpretation of Stump's crimes. By 1589, the Catholic faction had secured control of the Bedburg region. A brutal trial would dissuade Protestants from thoughts of rebellion, buttressing the Catholics' claim to power. Stump, who allegedly converted to Protestantism, may have seemed a fitting example. Some scholars allow for the possibility of this view, but Levack disputes it. Stump was prosecuted not as a warning to other Protestants, but because he had been accused of being a moral reprobate, regardless of his religious allegiance, he said. And that's the end of our spooky historical stories for tonight. Maybe later we'll read about Dante's Inferno or the Apocalypse. But thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a happy Halloween and a very good night.